The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Hebert, Saney's Director of Communications, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on self-study and self-assessment of personalized learning. Saney's is proud to present this webinar in cooperation with Castle Learning. As most of you know, Castle Learning is a core resource for supporting K-12 instruction and assessing student learning. Their web-based tools benefit teachers, students, administrators, and parents. Presenting today is Scott Fisher, President of Castle Learning, who leads a Castle team of educational professionals in multiple states. As you may notice by looking at your control panel, all participants are muted during the presentation, but we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, just use that Q&A panel, and we'll get to your questions after the presentation. Also, the presentation will be recorded, and you can be able to find that on sanews.org, and I'll send you all the link after the session is ended, and I get that posted to the website so you can go back and follow up at your convenience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and we'll get going.
Thanks, Michelle, and I'd like to welcome everybody into our 30-minute discussion today. Thanks for taking some time out of your valuable schedules to spend time talking about self-study and self-assessment. We know that personalized learning has become kind of a focus for many schools and districts, and it's made up of a lot of different parts, and the focus today is going to be around allowing students to do some self-study and self-assessment on their own. So as we go through this today, I'd really like you to kind of think out of the box a little bit, think about the resources that you have at the end of your fingertips in your respective school or district, and how those might play a role in the self-study and self-assessment side. Before we actually get started, I want to share a little message that was sent to us actually a couple weeks ago from a student, and I want you to take a second and read this, because when you break it down, it really says a lot about, I think, where students are today and what technology can do to help them improve academically as we talk about personalized learning and self-study and self-assessment. And we put out some video help to help kids kind of navigate on their own. And this was something that came back, and I took a lot out of this. Now, I'll be honest, we kind of helped him with a little sentence structure and punctuation here, but all the words there was his own, and he is from New York. And I think this is kind of true to what we might be talking about today.
Hi, Scott. It's Karen. I just joined.
Oh, hi, Karen. Thanks for
How are
jumping
you?
in. Appreciate it.
That's great.
Good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm reading this quote, which is pretty amazing. What was the video that the kid is referring to?
We were helping the students learn how to use the self-study side of preparing themselves for a New York State Regents exam. Okay. And how they could go in and use the instructional parts built into that to learn, actually identify where they had some strengths and weaknesses. This was something that he sent to us a couple weeks ago.
Wow. Pretty cool.
And it's something we've been hearing a lot of lately, what something technology does is allows students to get some instant help and instant feedback.
Nice.
So I wanted to share that with everybody. Just I think everybody has students that are interested in doing better academically within your school or your district, and it's nice to hear back from the students in a positive note. With that said, I'd like to kind of get into talking about the student self-study, self-assessment, but what I'd really like to do is take a look back first. And when I say back first, because I'm kind of on the old side, really ancient, maybe not as ancient as my little illustration here, but I'm close. I first want to take a look at what we had back in my early days of trying to look at doing self-study, and really self-assessment wasn't really an option at that point. But Karen, I know you and I can appreciate this. You know, we had a textbook pretty much for every course that we participated in, and it was a large book, and you stacked them all on top, and you've got a pretty decent pile. And that was pretty much what we had in the old days to go back and try and do some self-study on our own, was to really pull out that textbook. If the textbook didn't help us enough, you know, when we had this huge pile that we possibly had to take home with us, we could reach out and take a look at the old encyclopedia. And Karen, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. I remember my folks sitting with that salesman in the living room going through what it was going to cost them to get that encyclopedia grouping brought into the house. You remember that? Karen?
We had the book of knowledge in my house.
Exactly. So, so that was another area where we could do some self-study on our own. Again, you know, in a hardcover type book. The third, and one that we used to use a lot of, and I probably haven't touched one in a long time because technology allows us an easy application, was the dictionary. I didn't go anywhere with that. I took mine from the time I was in elementary, secondary school. I took it to college with me. And so, and the reason I wanted to take this look back, if you take these three great resources that we had back in the old days, they were great, but they did have some limitations to them. And the reason I want to talk about this is going to really kind of focus on where we're going when bringing technology into the self-study, self-assessment side. And some of the challenge that we had looking back at the older days was the fact that they were big and bulky. They were tough to carry around. I couldn't take that encyclopedia with me every place I went. We didn't have an option for the keyword search. There was no way to just go in and plug a word in and see what I could get based on that topic or that word. The little feedback we got from the student is having a video available to help me learn was not available from this type of resource. Technologies allows us to do something that paper couldn't, which was give us that instant feedback from even an instructional standpoint or helping that student learn. The ability to create an automatic test, and I know that textbooks, you know, in some cases might have some type of activity or test provided, but it was kind of limited and it was only one. There wasn't a lot of options to do multiples. So there was some limitations there too. And the ability really not to get any type of assessment reporting back to that student based on how well they might have done. So there was some limitations to the old format. Karen, anything you'd like to interject on that?
No, I think like you said, they were great resources, but we're in a completely different world now. So we need very, very different ways to, you know, access information, to prepare for assessments.
Exactly. And that's part of the reason why I brought this up, was I wanted to know, you know, here's where we were before, how far have we come, and that's where I want to go next. Is let's fast forward to what today we have in today's technology as a way to help further that student's self-study and self-assessment side. Today's technology allows us to deliver a lot of information from those old type formats to the new devices of today, whether that be on a laptop, a cell phone, a tablet. There's a lot of different devices that we can use in today's technology. And I know in a lot of cases, districts have invested a ton of resources into infrastructures and networks and one-on-one devices. So there's a lot going on the technology side of that today, and we need to maximize those resources that we've invested in. As we talk about the technology side of this, I know a lot of textbook companies have moved towards some type of digital format that can now be provided to the student, and that's crucial to have that access as we talk about technology, and especially in a one-to-one application, which a lot of districts I know are moving towards. But also that teacher's digital lesson. I know a lot of teachers that I talk to on a regular basis use some type of digital format for providing that instruction in their classroom, whether that be in a form of a PowerPoint or some type of video lesson or a URL, even a PDF document. Those kinds of things are all digital that can be not only used in the classroom, but also shared with the student outside the classroom. So let's talk about the teachers, that digital lesson for a brief second, because I think as we talk about this, it's going to play a huge key role in that self-study side of for the student, whether they can be in school or outside of school. And building those activities, the teacher, we really need to get the teacher comfortable with making sure that that digital lesson that they have can be used in a format that could be delivered and available to the student outside the classroom. I know as we try and get teachers more comfortable with technology, some of them have the basics and some are very, very tech savvy, but we also have a lot that are still struggling a little bit with it and maybe need some more guidance in how do I develop that digital lesson correctly that I'm using in a classroom to ensure that I can deliver correctly to the student. And when I say correctly, if you think about that from a file format that I may be able then to literally drop into your LMS. So for those of you that might be using something like a Google Classroom or a Schoology or something like that, where they can drop that instructional aid into that platform to allow student to have instant access to it for self-study, let's say outside of school, would be a key element of this self-study side. Kieran, anything you'd like to interject on that?
No, I think we're right on track.
Okay, great. So think about how we may need, through some PD and professional development, to bring teachers up to speed on how all that works, because that's something we're hearing in our day-to-day workshops is some teachers aren't totally comfortable with that, and I think that's an area that we need to spend some time on. Move to the next step. Let's assume at this point that we've got some type of digital lesson available. Now, again, that could come from the textbook, digital textbook that might be available, could come from the teacher's digital lesson that they're going to make available. We also then have to find a way to test the student's comprehension of the material that they're studying, allowing the student to get some type of activity available that we can assess. So the self-study test becomes crucial to the next component of the self-study, self-assessment side. And this can be done, could be done through a digital textbook type format if there's a test available or some type of assessment, or through, let's say, a resource that the district or school might already have available. One of the things that I will be doing today, only because I know it, and it's a product that I work with regularly, is our own in Castle Learning. So I'm going to show you some things there that you might want to think about when you're taking a look at your resources, and do they have those kind of capabilities for the student in the self-study and self-assessment side. One of the things that I'd like to talk about as it relates to both the instructional teacher digital lesson and the self-study test format is the use of modeling. Modeling is going to play a key role in this, folks. One of the things we've heard back from students is they're very tech savvy, but nobody showed them how to drive down the path. And I think if we can take some of the assets that we have in our classroom that the district has spent a lot of resources on, one being that interactive board, instead of just using it for a projection screen, let's use it as a way to model how a student might use the resource tools like that LMS, like some of those resources that we've invested in, to do self-study and self-assessment. So modeling, I think, is crucial to this, and showing teachers how to model that from the student side helps that teacher present that to the student. So that's something I know we spend a lot of time on in our workshops, is showing teachers not only the teacher application, but also the student side. Karen, anything you'd like to mention about modeling?
I think I really agree with a point that you made, and that is we really think that students are, quote, tech savvy, but that really means they know how to do what they know how to do. And that means they know how to text, and they know how to Snapchat, and they know how to, Instagram, and they know how to do all that. But it's kind of a misperception that students really do know how to use digital online resources without some deliberate instruction. So I think the modeling piece is really important. I think they would catch on in 5 seconds, but I think that, once again, that assumption that kids are just so tech savvy that they don't need that kind of explicit modeling wouldn't be necessarily correct. So I think this is an important part.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right in the head there, Karen. You know, the kids feel pretty comfortable with the technology. However, they're not always comfortable with exactly how to navigate it or how to interpret what they're getting back on that screen.
Right.
So, and that's some of the things I'm going to show as we go through the rest of this presentation today. Is I think the teacher needs to show them how to interpret the information that they see on that device.
Right. And I think we've learned too that with online assessments, when schools start using online assessments, they find out that these kids who are, quote, tech savvy really need very explicit instruction about how to scroll down, how to eliminate answers, how to do a lot of the kind of nitty-gritty things that kids have to be very familiar with to be successful with online assessments. So that explicit piece, I think, is really important.
I agree, and that's where something like this high-tech interactive board, I think, really comes into play, because they can show that application, you know, right to the front of the classroom. So, okay, great, thanks, Karen. So what I'm going to do today, folks, is I'm going to take you through some applications and get into the nitty-gritty of this side of it. One of it is the modeling part, because I think it's going to be a huge element to the students understanding what they can do with the resources that might be available and having that teacher model it right from the classroom. Assuming that you would be looking at an interactive board, this is where a teacher might use what we call our student center, and that's a student version of our product, and I'm sure your other resources may have something similar, that a teacher can use to see the exact student side of the tool that they're using, and also to be able to model this. So I want to, you know, for those of you that may already have our product as a tool, this is how a teacher could actually model it to their classroom. So using this student center would be a way to do that. From the student center, once they're modeling it, or if the student was into their user account, we're going to use the self-study side. Work can be issued by teachers. That happens all the time. We understand that, and I don't think that's going to stop. But in those situations where we want the student to go in and be able to self-study and practice and review and learn on their own, the self-study side of this is where they would go, and that's shown by the left-hand side of this student center here. That students' feedback that we saw when we first started out today, that feedback came from this center section of using that video link to help them guide them through the self-study side of preparing for a Regents exam. From the self-study side, you know, and one of the things we tried to do with this, and I'm sure your other resources, if you look at them, would also try to do this, is trying to lead the student down the path of easy steps so they don't have to figure out the navigational process. In this case, once they wanted to self-study, now they have to choose what application they want to use based on a course. This is the way it would look to our students right now, and they could select a specific course, or if they were going to prepare from a past Regents exam, they would use what we call our Regents button. This would lead them into a selection process, and I'm going to take you through a couple of these right now. Again, trying to lead the student into that self-study, self-test side. In this case, we're looking at the next step of the Regents button. In this sample, we would look at the fact that the student on the left-hand side could select from a number of past exams to look at. The difference between the full exam and the ones without the full exam listed next to it is those extended reply type questions. The ones without that would be strictly a multiple choice, multiple part, drag drop type concept where it could be instantly graded and assessed. The full exam would have the extended reply. The nice thing about the extended reply questions and the way it was done in here was when the student would submit their answer in that extended reply, it's going to give them what a good answer would have included. It instantly comes back to them so they can see if they were on target with what their reply would be to that constructive response type question. The biggest benefits we see in this is being able to see not only instant instructional help, but the instant assessment data so we can determine where they have strengths and weaknesses, and that's where that self-assessment will come into play in a couple minutes. This happens to be a little example of a math, the math component if grade 5, and I wanted to look in 2 different areas. So as opposed to preparing for, let's say, for a state test, I was looking more of a topical approach. I could do one of 2 things. I could look at math problems in a specific topic. Let's say, as you look down on the illustration on the left, in whole numbers or decimals or fractions, or I possibly might want to just need some practice in a specific skill area, which is that top green arrow, where I could just say, give me a bunch of questions in adding and subtracting fractions, and I could just practice on that, because that right now might be an area where I'm struggling. And again, assessing it as the student's going through that activity. And my third example that I wanted to point out would be in the ELA side. In this case, grade 7, where I know that maybe I need some more practice, or my teacher has actually encouraged me to go in and practice in a specific reading skill. In this case, let's say identifying mood and tone at that grade 7 level. I could go in and practice on my own. I'm going to get some feedback back to help me with that specific skill, as well as my teacher seeing how well I did, even though it was a self-generated activity. These are a couple of examples that I wanted to show you that even though they're different applications, the structure is basically the same for the student, so the student isn't learning something new all over every time they go someplace else, as far as the navigational side of it goes. Let me give you an idea what the question and what this whole part of the self-study side, and one of the reasons we've spent so much time in not only the first attempt for the student to answer a question, but what happens after that, especially if it's incorrect. So in this case, we have a question relating to that reading skill of mood and tone. By the way, one of the things we do provide, and I'm sure a lot of your other resources may also, is a text-to-speech component, which can help those students that may have that in a requirement in their IEP, or if they just need some help in having it read to them, it's available to everybody. So the student would answer the question. Let's assume they're wrong, and this is where that self-study, self-learning side comes in, is even though they're incorrect, we didn't want the student to stop right there. We wanted to try and help them learn while they're on that one question. And I know a lot of tools may say, well, we can grade or tell the student whether they're right or wrong, which is true. We felt instead of just saying you're incorrect, student, move on to the next question, we said, let's tell them that they're incorrect, but give them some instructional help. And again, going back to that whole learning part of the self-study side, is we're trying to get that student to help them learn while they're on the question, even though they were incorrect. So in this case, they would get some type of instructional hint without trying to give away the answer, along with some related vocabulary, and the option now to go in and try to correct their answer. And that's where this next part comes into play, which would be in this case on the retry, the answer was correct. The student's going to know that it was correct and the reason why that was the correct answer on the retry. Karen, anything you'd like to interject here?
No, I think the examples are really helpful.
Great, and this is something that technology allows us to do that back in the old days we couldn't get from that textbook and the encyclopedia and the dictionary, is that instant feedback. So, okay, with that said, I want to talk about the last component part of this. And as students go through and look at that lesson, take some type of activity, whether it be a test or practice or an assessment, is the ability to allow that student to take a look at their own progress report. So that self-assessment becomes a part of this whole puzzle that we're going after in personalized learning, is allowing the students to see their own strengths and weaknesses. With that said, one of the things that we've done and built into our product, which I'm sure some of your other resources may have also done this, is the ability to take a look at some type of reporting and allowing the students to see that too. Now, we know the teacher is going to get data back based on the student's participation, but we want the student to also see some type of data that they can easily analyze and take a look at where they may have had some problems or some weaknesses as they went through that activity. So using that student center again, we're going to use the reports button on the left to get to that self-study side, and that's what this this illustration is on your screen right now. From there, the student would be able to go in and take a look at an activity that they participated in and see their own personal assessment report. And I took a portion of the report to take a look at for this slide, which is going to show up in the top left-hand corner, like a circle or the pie chart, which show me how well I did as a student. In this case, I know that out of these 10 questions I took, that 8 of them I got correct, which is the green color. The yellow color would be that I missed one of those questions and I got it right on the retry. And the red would be that I missed it on my first attempt and on my retry. When I look down below, I see each of those questions individually, knowing that the questions I got right, which are the green ones. The yellow one, which was question number 1, I actually missed on my first attempt, but got right on the retry. But question number 5 was the question that gave me the most problems. That's the one I missed on both attempts. And if I wanted to look at that to go back and review how I did on that question, all I would need to do, and using technology, would be to click on the question. And that would allow me to go and actually take a look at the question. On the right-hand side, I can see how I responded to that question in both my first and second response, and what the right answer was, and the reason why for it was the correct answer. And what we've heard from students is this has really helped them take a look at where those questions were that they may have struggled with in that activity and try to get over some of those hurdles that they stumbled on along that assessment. Karen, anything you want to interject here?
Nope, looks good.
Okay. So these are positive things as we talk about that reporting. And again, I'm going to go back one page. The reporting is easy for the student to look at, not only how well they did as an overall grade, but also where they might have had some weaknesses by individual questions. We can also see then a topical breakdown to which topics, in this case, just for illustration purposes, I only have one in here, but if there was multiple topics within that activity, I could see topics that I was strong and weak on as a student. Now, I'm pointing the arrow to a blue bar that says 80%. Based on a threshold that would be either set by the student or requested by the teacher, the student would see a red or blue bar. Blue bar meaning they met the mastery level that was set and exceeded that. If it's a red bar, it means they fell below that mastery level, and that may be a weaker area where they need some more instruction time and more assessment. Karen, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I'm getting it.
Okay,
I just wish we had this when I was in school. That's all I can say.
Me too. I would have probably done a lot better in a few courses.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so I want you to think about these as being literally at the end of the tips of that student. Again, in school, outside of school, on any type of device, you've got resources that can deliver this as part of that student self-study and self-assessment. So what I'd like to kind of finish up with today, as we get pretty close to the ending of our 30 minutes here, is I want to talk about the plan just real quick. Remember, we need to review what the school and the district has as resources for the student to use in self-study and self-assessment. So think about the teacher side, the digital resources, either from their lesson or the textbook. Think about the resources that might provide that student some self-study activities and assessment through the additional resources, again, like something like what we offer in Castle Learning or another tool that you might have. So those are going to play a key role in this. We need to bring the teachers up to speed, showing them how to model this side into the classroom. How do the kids use those resources appropriately to self-study and self-assess? And the last bullet I'd really like to do is you got to find a way to encourage and monitor what's going on in self-study and use some type of incentive. I think kids like the incentive. Build it in some way, and I think if you encourage it on a regular basis and monitor what they're doing from that self-study, self-assessment side, it's going to benefit that student and the teacher in the future.
So
those
Scott,
are three key elements.
the teacher can see, if a teacher has 19 students in a class, the teacher can look on the site and see how much time students are spending on this?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
That's one of the things that we've provided in our resource tool, is the ability for the teacher to see work that their students might be doing in the self-study side. How much activity is going on and how well the students are doing on those self-study. In fact, one of the things I've got teachers doing with it is you actually encourage kids to go in and do the self-study and the self-assessment side and giving them extra credit for it. So there was one of those incentive things I'm talking about. So did that answer your question, Karen?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, we're kind of at that 30-minute mark right now. I'd like to just kind of open up, Michelle, if there's any questions from our participants, our attendees today.
All right. Well, I don't see anything in the box now. Does anybody have a question for Scott before we log off for the day? You just type that right into your questions panel. Well, I'm not seeing anything, but everyone, I will record this video. It has been recorded. We'll post it on saneys.org, and all registrants will also get a direct push-out link to that. And in there, Scott's got his email up here, and I'll include that in the email as well. So should you have any follow-up questions, you can just simply reach out to Scott directly and go from there. But I think we're good for today.
That's great. Karen, thanks for your input as always, and Michelle for coordinating this. And I thank everybody for spending some time with us today and out of their busy day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.